President Biden still lags in the polls, but the news is generally good for Democrats. Ballot measures protecting abortion win big this week in red and purple states.
Democrats are trying to scare women into thinking Republicans don't want abortion legal under any circumstances.
We were told that Republicans would get tired of all the winning. How's that working out?
But a surprising announcement from a key Democrat throws the future of the Senate into question.
I will not be running for re-election to the United States Senate.
Next.
This is Washington Week with The Atlantic. Corporate funding provided by
Consumer Cellular. This is Sam. How may I help you? This is a pocket dial. Well, somebody's pocket. Thought I'd let you know that with Consumer Cellular, you get nationwide coverage with no contract. That's kind of our thing. Have a nice day.
Additional funding is provided by Koo and Patricia Ewan through the Ewan Foundation, committed to bridging cultural differences in our communities. Sandra and Carl DeLay Magnuson, Rose Herschel and Andy Shreves, Robert and Susan Rosenbaum, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you. Once again from Washington, Editor-in-Chief of The Atlantic and moderator, Jeffrey Goldberg.
It's been a busy week here, and there's much to discuss, starting with Joe Manchin's announcement and the possibility that he might run for president as an independent. Joining me to discuss this week's developments are Eugene Daniels, a White House correspondent for Politico and the co-author of Politico's Playbook. Asma Khalid is a White House correspondent for NPR. Ed O'Keefe is the senior White House correspondent and a political correspondent for CBS News. And David Brooks is a columnist for the New York Times, a contributing writer at The Atlantic, and the author of How to Know a Person. So thank you all for being here. David, welcome to the big time.
Thank you.
This is your, after years of trying out on the NewsHour, you finally made it. I hope you're not too nervous.
I'm a Washington Week virgin, so I'm
by the way, this is the latest you've ever stayed up, I think. So congratulations.
Thank you for lowering your standards.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And we're going to talk about how to know a person tonight. And we're going to start by asking David how to know Joe Manchin. David, why don't you start us off on this question?
Deeply into his heart.
Yeah, and his soul,
and
right?
what you see is a guy looking at the White House.
So tell us, and I want to bring everybody into this conversation, obviously, but tell us what it means, Joe Manchin's announcement.
Yeah, it means he's really interested in running for president. And to run for president, you got to get on the ballot. And there's an organization, No Labels, that's getting on the ballot. And so No Labels hasn't decided. Larry Hogan has said that No Labels probably wants a Republican and not him if they go ahead. But I think Joe Manchin sees a window, and he's going for it. And so, what interests me is the potential end of the two-party duopoly in presidential races. You could have a Manchin or Hogan and No Labels. You have Cornel West. You have Jill Stein. You have Robert F. Kennedy. So we could have
the three you just named are not exactly juggernauts. Manchin theoretically
He could
do something, but, we've seen this. I mean, Asma, we've seen this before.
Yeah, you've seen this in many elections. I think the challenge for Joe Biden, though, is that in, recent cycles, right, if we think of 2016, where Donald Trump did defeat Hillary Clinton, many, political analysts would say, many of us who cover the election, that part of that loss was due to third-party candidacies. Right. And so I do think all of these potentials pose challenges to Joe Biden, in major part because if you look at polling, there are some challenges he faces from a group of key voters, key parts of his coalition, whether that is young voters, black voters. You see different parts of his base that seem to have lackluster enthusiasm for his candidacy.
And talk a little bit about, if you want to push back on David, it's his first time, so it was sort of mandatory to push back on him. Yeah. But do you think that Joe Manchin could actually become president?
Well, the answer to this question is show us how you get on enough ballots to win 270 electoral votes. And unless or until No Labels or some other entity hires enough lawyers and signature gatherers in enough states to do this, it's just worthy of a conversation like this. And I think part of what you have to remember with Joe Manchin is, yes, he, like most of the Senate, has designs on the White House, but he also is perfectly happy having all of us just talk about him on Friday night because what he craves is the attention that gives him the political capital to get things done in the Senate. And if all he has left now is a year, well, there's still things that are going to need to get done. And yes, he will travel the country talking to people who are eager to hear about how there is a middle out there that's thoughts and prayers are not being addressed here in Washington. But he's not actively engaged in the process of getting signatures and getting ballot access. And unless or until No Labels can demonstrate that, I'm told by his people, he's not terribly interested in doing this. He's also said recently to his team, if they think Larry Hogan's going to be the presidential candidate and I'm going to be the vice presidential candidate, they got another thing coming. I'm not interested.
I mean, Eugene, maybe this is just about the fact that he probably can't win his seat again in very, very, very red West Virginia.
You know, that was very clear he was going to have an uphill battle. There's no other Democrat that could win in West Virginia, and it was already clear he was going to have.
That's literally true.
Like
There's literally
not.
True. There's not one Democrat in West Virginia who could win.
And unless John Denver came back.
and the White House tried to get him to stay in the Senate race. Now, that's partly because they wanted him to try to do as much as he can so they could try to keep that Senate seat, but also because they know that they didn't want him out there mucking it up for them as some kind of third-party candidate, either with No Labels or without them. And I will say, one thing I found interesting about his video that he released is that he talked about creating a movement. And that's not really how movements are made, right? Like, movements have to come from the ground up, right? There's not actually this center of political universe that's coming around and saying, where's my Joe Manchin? Where's my Larry Hogan? That's not what's happening, right? Like, that is not what the centrist
Donald Trump created a movement. Yeah. There was no MAGA before Donald Trump.
But there's only one Donald Trump.
And that came from the people, right? Like, Obama created a movement as well, but it comes from the people have to say, I like this person.
Eugene,
right?
let me ask you, what else did you notice about the video?
You're going to give me in trouble. New haircut.
Presidential.
Presidential.
There's our proof. Very presidential
That's all
haircut.
You need. That sartorial choice is all you need.
And apparently he paid the Oval Office red.
Exactly.
David, talk about what this means for the Senate. And you've been writing for years about centrist senators, not just Democrats, but the vanishing breed of moderate Republican centrist Democrats. What does this mean for the Senate?
Well, they keep vanishing. So there's one less. And so, one of the things I've been defending Joe Manchin because the Biden administration wanted a $4 trillion spending bill, and Manchin said, no, it's a $1 trillion spending bill. And if they had spent $4 trillion, inflation would have been through the roof. And so I think he actually played a vital role for the Democrats, even though most Democrats really dislike the guy. But you are seeing a loss of voice after voice after voice, and Kyrsten Sinema and some of the other remaining moderates seem genuinely in mourning that they're losing a teammate.
Right.
You're seeing the same, though, on the Republican side. I mean, isn't that just indicative of the way that politics is in this moment in this country, that there's really very little appetite for allegedly a centrist moderate movement?
Well, let's talk about the two other senators, Brown and Tester, who are running for Democrats who are running for re-election in red states, one very red state and one pretty red state. What are their chances?
So you're talking about Sherrod Brown of Ohio and John Tester of Montana.
Tester of Montana.
Sherrod Brown, after this week's probably thinking, why couldn't we hold that abortion referendum next year? Because it might have helped him. But John Tester wisely sent out a fundraising note just minutes after Manchin's announcement saying, well, now all the money and the attention's coming to me. You need to help me out. And yes, both of them now become mission critical for Democrats. But they're also now, you're going to hear conversation about, well, could we make a play for Texas? Colin Allred, who's the leading Democratic contender, has raised a lot of money, is pretty popular in that state. Ted Cruz is on the ballot. Or do you go down to Florida and hope that Rick Scott somehow stumbles, and maybe you get a pickup there? There are still ways for Democrats to hold or at least get to 50-50, and then if they win the White House, have that vote, which will challenge the vice president's future ambitions if that's where we're headed. But, all is not necessarily lost. And you still have the potential to pick up or hold, essentially, you would hold a seat in Arizona. Races in Nevada are always competitive, but Democrats usually eke it out. So it'll be close. But certainly those two moderates are now the ones to watch.
Right. I want to come to the abortion issue for the Democrats, a huge issue. But let's stay on the subject of these third-party candidates. I mean, Joe Manchin is a serious player in American politics. RFK Jr. gets a lot of attention. Jill Stein gets less attention. Cornel West gets attention in a very limited segment of the Democratic left. But are Democrats right to be worried? Mainstream party Democrats, Joe Biden re-elect Democrats.
Absolutely, they should be worried because it only takes a sliver, that sliver of the left that Cornel West can pull from in a couple of these states, and that's wrap for Joe Biden, right? You could, as you were talking about 2016, a lot of Hillary Clinton supporters and folks that worked on her campaign, when Jill Stein announced, they were on Twitter, or X, excuse me, talking about how
we can call it Twitter here.
Let's say space. Talking about how she is the reason that Hillary Clinton lost Michigan or Wisconsin, or pick one of those blue wall states, right? And I think that is something this White House and this campaign, they're not saying it out loud, but they are worried about it because they're concerned about it.
I also think the political world is just radically more unstable than it was even 4 years ago.
Yeah.
People are just really annoyed. They're furious at the state of the country. They're furious at the direction. And it's ripe for some sort of disruption that we can't even see. And they want a younger guy like Joe Manchin, who's 76.
But I mean, I agree with the sense that I do think you just need a sliver, and I think it depends on certain votes, right? I mean, I've heard a lot from voters and folks just within the party system about Michigan, right? Because of what's going on with Israel and Gaza. You've heard that some of the Arab American community is upset there. Michigan's a state that Hillary Clinton lost by 10,000 votes. You know, these are slivers, they're tiny percentages, but Democrats really can't afford to lose a state like Michigan. And, you know, you get the sense that they are aware of that. They're trying to reach out to some of the younger, more progressive voters. But again, some of those younger, more progressive voters aren't really aligned with Biden on a host of other issues. They're frustrated about student loan debt, some other issues.
But what are the chances, though, let's stay on that for 1 second. What are the chances that a significant number of Arab American voters in Michigan go to Trump?
I don't think a significant number would go to Trump. What I hear is that they would sit it out. And I have met folks who sat it out in 2016. I, in fact, went to go do a reporting trip ahead of the 2020 election, specifically met young black voters and young Arab American voters who sat it out in 2016. They just didn't like Hillary Clinton. They gave Biden a chance. That's the danger, is losing some of those folks to sit it out or potentially go third party.
Right. Well. Speaking of reporting trips, you recently went to Arizona, among other places. You were in South Carolina today, actually, with the vice president. Thank you for taking a nap or Red Bull or whatever got you here. But you were there talking a lot about abortion. I want to sort of focus in on that issue. How regretful are some Republican strategists that the Supreme Court ruled in their favor?
I mean, so what I hear from Republicans, as well as Democrats in the state of Arizona, is they see that if abortion is on the ballot, which it very well could be in the state of Arizona in 2024, that poses a real challenge for Republicans. Because much like what you saw in Ohio, Arizona is currently, they're gathering signatures to put this ballot referendum on to put a constitutional right for abortion in 2024. I was out just tag teaming, watching people do these ballot signatures, voter after voter. Afterwards, I'd interview them, and they would say, you know, I'm not really aligned with the Democratic Party. Some of them, Republicans, some of them, like, I don't like anybody. But they were out there to sign this ballot referendum. And that's the thinking Democrats have, and that is the fear Republicans have, is that voters will turn out for this abortion issue. And while they're there, hey, just vote for the Democratic
Party. They might just vote
potentially, yeah.
And it may happen in Florida as well. So you could see, if not the Senate race, House candidates benefit from this in Florida. New York is going to have one of these ballot issues next year, and you think to yourself, well, blue New York. But the more Democrats show up in suburban New York City, in the 5 or 6 House districts that could flip from red to blue, and then you'd have Speaker Hakeem Jeffries.
Quick reporting.
This is why Democrats want it.
Quick reporting question for you. You were just in Florida this week at a Trump rally. Did he talk about abortion?
No, didn't come up nearly as much as it did at the debate 10 miles away, and the way it comes up now with Democrats. I mean, he takes credit for putting judges on the bench who have ruled in favor of more restrictive abortion rights or of ending Roe versus Wade, because he understands in a Republican primary you have to do that. But ultimately, if he makes it to the general, it's one reason why there are a lot of Republicans who believe he won't win, because Democrats will remind everyone he put the judges on the court that made this happen.
There's something interesting about Trump seems to not be hurt as much by this abortion backlash, or maybe I'm overreading events right now, but could this actually hurt him, or is it a down ballot kind of problem for Republicans next year?
I think it could hurt every single Republican, right? I mean, if he's the nominee, that is something that's going to be on the minds of voters when they head into the ballot box, right? When they head to go vote. I think all of us have been surprised by the saliency of abortion, right? Like, I think, people thought the midterms, sure, some of these special elections that happened in 2022, sure, but we're in November of 2023, and voters are still voting on the side of abortion access because, like those voters that you talked to in Arizona, when you talk to people, Americans do not like things taken away from them, right? They do not like, that is something that we feel very strongly about. Once we have something, we don't want to take it away from us, And so that is what the Republican Party is learning the hard way at this point. And it's not an issue of messaging, because there's a lot of Republicans in Virginia, for example, Glenn Youngkin, the governor there, was saying, well, if we just talk about it a little differently and say 15 weeks instead of 6 weeks, that's going to be the thing. It's not an issue of messaging. Exactly. It's not messaging. It is a policy issue that they have with a lot of the voters in this country.
Yeah, and the broader lesson of the election is it's not only on abortion, but all sorts of cultural war issues have lost saliency. And so if there's anything we learned that Glenn Youngkin's, not personal defeat, but the Republican Party's defeat in Virginia, it's no longer when Glenn Youngkin got elected. And Andy Beshear's victory in Kentucky, the governor got reelected, and he was running like bread and butter practicalities. And so I think the lesson for Joe Biden is run, as David Axelrod has been saying, run a comparison campaign. And I would add, run a prosaic campaign. Don't make it about who do you like less. Make it about, I'm giving you student debt, I'm giving you prescription drugs, just concrete products. And I think if Joe Biden makes the campaign about himself, that's probably a bad idea. But if he makes it about the products he can deliver, infrastructure spending, all that kind of stuff, then it's off him, and here's concrete benefits.
And they've struggled to get that message out. I mean, I go on trips with them where the $35 insulin fee right now, that gets a rip-roaring applause. But it is something that hasn't managed to translate. And I came back and I told my editor, I'm so shocked, insulin is like a huge applause line. But it is,
We got a lot of diabetics.
And the vice president talked about it today in South Carolina in a crowd full of black voters. I mean, they know. That's
Right.
the base. You got to remind them of that.
That's
And when you
interesting.
remind the one person there, they go remind their kids, their neighbors, and that's why you got to go
Right.
vote. They're very formulaic about it.
I want to go to this. You use the word comparison, a comparison election. We've been talking a lot on this show everywhere in Washington about age, specifically Biden's age and cognitive abilities. There are a lot of people on the right who say that he's lost much of his cognitive ability. I want to play a couple of clips from this week to show you to complicate that narrative a little bit. I'm going to roll those.
You okay? I want the press to know that wasn't me.
The press hates when I say they're smart. He said they were smart. Well, what am I supposed to say? They're stupid people? Kim Jong-un leads 1.4 billion people, and there's no doubt about who the boss is.
Now, you know what's interesting about that latter clip? I mean, the first one is interesting because Biden seems pretty sharp, funny, right? Maybe not the fastest moving guy in the world, but sharp and funny. The second part, if Joe Biden came out and said that North Korea has 1.4 billion people, we'd all be all over that. Oh my God, the President of the United States doesn't know that he's talking about China, not North Korea, right? With Trump, maybe it's all baked in to people's assumptions about what he knows and what he doesn't know.
But this is different. He didn't used to do this. And this is the one change we've seen in him in the last few years, and even in the last just few months, that he's confusing names and places. He did with Turkey and Hungary a few weeks ago. And yes, they'll look at us and say, you guys are nitpicking and into details. But, when you take it all collectively, it signals something has changed in their behavior.
Well, we're all supposed to be, as voters, we're all supposed to be judging the abilities and preparation of a...
And that was a good event for the president. It was a labor union event. It was a victory for him and for labor unions. He, of course, calls himself the most pro-labor president in modern times. They haven't all been like that, though, recently. And the thing is, he's going to need a lot more days like that event in Illinois to start turning that around.
I think some of this is somebody who covers the White House. Part of it's about access, right? I mean, I do think that Trump, we've all seen him. He's readily been available even during his days in the White House. And one of the things that I think we both could agree in covering the White House is President Biden has not been readily available to the press. And the more, say, missteps you make, the less they become a news story because people just get more comfortable seeing it.
Remember the crazy Uncle Joe? We knew that when he was in the Senate. We knew that when he was in the vice presidency. Because he'd say anything and people said, oh, whatever.
I've been interviewing the guy for 30 years, not to play the old guy card here, but sorry. And, I interviewed him several times in the White House. And he is basically with it. He's like a pitcher who used to throw
He can
87, who
answer
throws
questions
85.
under the plane, under the wing, no problem.
And so he's, in some ways, he's a little better than when it used to interview him, because he used to try to pack every fact in the known universe into every answer. And now he's got some message discipline. But people think he's a doddering old grandpa. It's not true.
But why not make him more available?
That's what it is. But here's what happens. This is happening again this week. Bad polls come out. He comes and starts talking to us again for a few days. And we go, oh, look, he's accessible. Bad news happens, and he stops talking to us. And that's exactly what happened. He spent 2 times talking to you guys, or to the reporters going to Illinois. Then Joe Manchin drops out, and suddenly we don't see him again because the bad news happened. Last time it was something with his son.
Well, President Biden, you're invited to this show anytime. We'll get this group together. Well, we could talk for as long as you like. No. I mean, you're probably onto something. I mean, it always is a bit self-serving when we say, "Oh, just talk more." To us, but there's something to be said for like lowering the mystery or removing that shroud of mystery around his health or his cognitive. I mean, we're also comparing apples and oranges because Donald Trump has a whole set of other issues related to his behavior, his relationship to reality, relationship to the truth. I'm trying to say this as diplomatically as possible, and hoping that David Brooks comes in and rescues him from this cul-de-sac.
The cavalry is here.
Thank you.
I think
he's not a traditional politician the way Joe Biden is.
The big question for this presidential election for me is, I have a feeling, and it's only an instinct, but based on a lot of reality, that it's going to be a foreign policy election. The world is getting a lot more dangerous. The Middle East is blown up, Ukraine is blown up, we're ripe for something in Asia. And how will the country react? Who do they think is the safer pair of hands when the world's on fire? And it's not really clear to me what the answer to that question is.
Wait, it's not clear to you the answer to the question or the answer
or
to
whether
what the
they
country...
think, I mean, I think Biden is well positioned for a foreign policy election because that's what he's been doing his whole life.
Right.
And he actually has a cohesive theory about the world fighting authoritarianism. And Donald Trump has no theory. And in Ukraine, he's clearly, in my view, on the wrong side, but he doesn't want to get involved. In the Middle East, you guys would know better than I, but what I've heard Trump say about the Middle East is some random word salad. I see no policy there at all.
Not yet.
I mean, I think you're right. I think President Biden is attempting to make it a foreign policy election. I don't know if that's actually going to work. Voters tend to only care about foreign policy when it's American boots or American lives.
I was going to say, we're not talking about Afghanistan anymore.
Yeah.
That was the crisis that was going to tear down this presidency. And I don't know. I mean, if the war...
I think also the Democratic Party itself, his coalition of voters are not unified if we're talking about the Middle East. So I think it would behoove him or the Democratic Party to not make it a foreign policy.
Can I, in the few minutes that we have remaining, couple minutes we have remaining, can I talk about the fact that Trump is almost certainly going to be the nominee, and that the debates that we're watching, seemingly every week, are a little bit of a tryout, beauty contest for VP. I just want you to watch one fascinating moment from the debate just a couple of days ago.
In the last debate, she made fun of me for actually joining TikTok while her own daughter was actually using the app for a long time. So you might want to take care of your family first.
Leave my
before
daughter
preaching
out
to
of your
anybody else, your
voice.
adult daughter. The next generation of Americans are using it.
You're just
the easy
So you're just scum. That was a pretty exciting moment. We only have a couple of minutes left, but I did want to get your quick views on who he might be thinking about for vice president and why that person.
I mean, if character and temperament is what he's looking for in someone who is akin to him, Vivek Ramaswamy seems to be the clearest candidate on stage.
Put. Very elegantly put.
His team would tell you they're keeping an eye on Nikki Haley and Tim Scott. They bring 2 different sets of skills and backgrounds, but obviously her with the foreign policy experience, being a woman, being a governor, there's a certain set of experiences. Tim Scott, African-American, a senator, affable, well-liked, and probably won't go the distance.
I think those 2 choices are interesting. Kristi Noem, governor of South Dakota, there's a relationship that they've had a rift a little bit at times.
Everybody has a rift.
Also, this one I think is scary for a lot of people. Carrie Lake out of Arizona is also one that you hear
I agree with that. I mean, Kanye West is the obvious choice. But aside from that, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, maybe Elise Stefanik, I don't know, but I would go with Carrie Lake. She'd be my favorite.
Yeah.
Not personal favorite, but betting favorite.
How to know a person. Take it from David Brooks. Everybody should read this book. I'm gonna gift this book to some lucky panelist.
Laugh, you will cry.
You will laugh. You will cry. I want everybody to read this wonderful book. David, it's great to have you. Everybody, it's great to have you. Fortunately, we have to leave it there for now, but I want to thank our panelists for joining us and for sharing your reporting. Tune in tomorrow to PBS News Weekend for a look at a unique new program that helps military veterans with PTSD and depression. And before we go, we want to take a moment to remember my friend Gwen Ifill, the groundbreaking journalist and longtime moderator of this program, who passed away 7 years ago this week. We miss her voice and we miss her moral clarity. I'm Jeffrey Goldberg. Good night from Washington.
Corporate funding for Washington Week with The Atlantic is provided by
Consumer Cellular, this is Sam. How may I help you? This is a pocket dial. Well, somebody's pocket. Thought I'd let you know that with Consumer Cellular, you get nationwide coverage with no contract. That's kind of our thing. Have a nice day.
Additional funding is provided by Koo and Patricia Ewens with the Ewen Foundation, committed to bridging cultural differences in our communities. Sandra and Carl DeLay Magnuson, Rose Herschel and Andy Shreves, Robert and Susan Rosenbaum, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.